Hey, it's Arvid. Welcome to the Bootstrapped Founder. This episode is sponsored by Paddle.com, my merchant of record payment provider of choice. They're taking care of all the things related to money, so founders like you and me can focus on building the things that only we can build. Paddle handles the rest. I highly recommend it, so please check it out at Paddle.com. There's a term I've been reading a lot about this week that's been keeping me up at night. Metaphorically, I do sleep, but it is just always on, and that's model collapse. And if you're building any kind of AI-powered business, which I guess we have to face at this point, most of us are doing these days, this should probably keep you up too. The concept is, I would almost call it deceptively simple because it's kind of complicated if you look into it deeply, but the implications are staggering. Model collapse is what happens when AI models are trained on their own outputs. The quality of the data that they provide degrades over time, and that creates a feedback loop of declining accuracy and truth. So think about it this way. Before AI became ubiquitous, when you looked at data on the internet, you had some kind of measurement of trust. Right? You had the reputable source, you had the domain authority, and that kind of stuff was generally reliable and true, particularly those that were legally mandated to be correct, like government institutions, data that was approved, tested, and verified from official sources. That stuff worked. But now, even those traditionally reliable players use AI systems to generate some part of their data. And that AI-generated content will inevitably seep into the training data for next generation of models. So any distortion that exists today will become stronger and more distorted with every iteration. And this creates a guaranteed decline in quality over time. And that's not exactly a promising outlook for technology we're all betting our businesses on at this very moment. Here's what's fascinating and terrifying about this. We might be living through this golden age of AI accuracy right now, and we might not even know it. Like the models that were trained around now, or let's just say a year or two ago, are probably the least influenced by already existing AI-generated content. They just didn't have the time to scrape it all and put it into the models. They might not be as performant or as deeply interconnected when it comes to processing data as those future models will be, like the GPT-6 and 7 and 8 over the next couple decades, but they're also the least touched by their own outputs, just because they didn't have time to ingest it just yet. So in some ways, we're witnessing the purest forms of these systems, probably also the truest form of these systems, before they start eating their own tail. And this reminds me of something that we've already seen play out on the internet for decades, the rise of programmatic SEO. You know exactly what I'm talking about if you ever tried to find genuine information online and then stumbled upon pages and pages of these algorithmically generated content designed purely to rank, right? You've all seen this. Probably every recipe website is kind of this. There's a lot of stuff that shouldn't be there, but it's there, so it ranks. So you see it because it ranks. And these are common tactics for software businesses to generate leads. Like you create websites programmatically with certain content that search engines find and then rank highly. Customers come to you, and then those customers pay you money. And this allows companies to spend more time building systems to find more customers that way and rank even higher in search engines. And we've always called this automated content creation. And we don't call it wrong or like false content, but we recognize it for what it is. It's an almost infuriating way of creating things just to be found on search engines. It's not really a genuine expression of art or anything like this. It's just content optimized for retrievability. And it perverts the idea of the search engine being a neutral arbiter of information. And that's kind of what Google was in the beginning, right? They were trying to say, hey, here's PageRank. We track the links that pages have to each other, and the highest link, the best content, that gets on top of the page. Well, first the ad model came along and that didn't work anymore. And now content just created to rank. Well, that just escalates all of this into optimization and ranking games. And here's the thing, I play this game too. With Podscan, I'm using AI to extract and analyze data to build landing pages for tens of thousands of podcast episodes, or rather podcasts with a couple episodes there. So it's just listing all the things about the podcast, right? That's what I do. That's what I use this AI data for. And that's where I acquire a lot of my users. And from them, some turn into customers. That's kind of my path into customership. So I am contributing to the very phenomenon that I'm kind of concerned about. I'm adding to the training data for future models. And that is true no matter what quality my data is, right? Everything that I put out there will eventually be scraped and ingested. So the question is now, well, what am I responsible for? And I think this creates a responsibility that I was not expecting when I started building an AI-powered business. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to use all these amazing AI tools and supply data to my customers. But I am now finding myself asking, am I contributing to model collapse? Am I decreasing the overall quality of these models just by taking AI generated data or AI generated information and turning that into content out there? I'm not asking this question just to justify the existence of Podscan as a service that analyzes and extracts and displays data. I think that is just a market need and people are paying for this because they need the information. But I'm asking because I want to be able to tell people who want to build businesses on AI features, like yourself, might already be doing this. Not just using AI to write code, but integrating this kind of tool that's technology into their businesses, how to approach this over the long term. I want to be able to speak to the long-term implications of using AI as a central feature or central motivator of your business. Because we can't just be building hype-based products in a time where we're so early in the development of this technology. Because if we don't understand the long-term repercussions of our work, and we can't really be prepared to answer questions about it, we might not find customers because they don't trust that this stuff is going to work for us. We might not find investors if we ever need them because they don't understand what our moat would be if this technology would just fall apart in a couple of years, right? We need to be able to respond to questions that we ask ourselves for the strategy of our businesses. So if you're building something like an image generation software, for example, or any of the generative AI products that we see flooding the indie hacker community. And I mean this in a neutral way. There's just a lot of them. You kind of have to ask yourself, what do these products do in the long term, right? Are they enriching the ecosystem or are they polluting it? And if you're building anything that uses generative AI, even just a chatbot or something, those logs might end up somewhere. So are you enriching or polluting? And I think it's almost always a balance. It has to be, because on the one hand, you could argue that anything non-real that's supposed to be real dilutes reality. If you really want to pull it down to the abstract level, right? If you come up with something fake, and you could argue that any chatbot is a fake person, then any discussion that comes out of this is at least half fake if it's between a human and that robot. But on the other hand, generative AI creates possibilities that would never have existed without services that make creation so affordable and cheap and accessible. And this leads to incredible accomplishments in art and personal development and overcoming these very financial obstacles that previously prevented people from even starting a business. And I don't think there's a magical solution to this dilemma between it is all fake, but it also makes things happen that would never have been real in the first place. I think there's an approach that can help us navigate it responsibly. And this is an approach that I internally to myself call real world enrichment. And you could probably project it onto whatever you're doing with AI as well. With Podscan, a lot of the data that I extract from podcast episodes, for example, focuses solely on the spoken phrases and words and people inside that episode. What are people saying? Who's speaking? Who's mentioned? All of this is part of a real conversation out there, right? If you just ignore the fact that sometimes podcasts are also AI generated, but the conversations that we are tracking, we try to see the humans in them. And none of this is generative to the point where it would come up with new things. All of this analysis that we do is derivative of the humanly produced content that already exists in this episode. The creative and generative work that happens when we do things like summarizing. And yes, when you write a summary that has never been written before, it's kind of a lossy compression of the content, and it's still derivative of the content and not necessarily problematic for pollution and potentially model collapse, but it can introduce errors if the summarizer mistakes words or phrases or associations. So there is potentially the risk in here for this to be a model collapse accelerator. I think the same goes for the demographic data that we offer to paying customers, like stuff like audience size estimates and audience makeup estimates, demographics, location-based distributions, assumed demographics, right? I'm using the inherent bias in the model to extract the data. And all of this comes with the asterisk of being creative derivatively through an AI system that has its own internal biases. This is something that I recently talked to Rob Walling about for a course that he is currently creating. And we did a little AI session there. And I think I'm going to put the link to this in the show notes here. But we had an hour or so conversation just around what are the problems that founders face when they look into building something with AI. What are the technical issues? What are the operational issues? What are cost, risks, that kind of stuff. Talked to Rob extensively about all of this. And one of the things I talked about is that any AI system has an internal bias, right? The bias is the data that it was trained on is humans with their own individual biases all aggregated into one big bias. But for PodScan, that bias, I think, to a very strong extent, is actually useful. If my model that I use thinks that Joe Rogan mostly has a right-leaning-ish male audience, that's probably somewhat accurate because in the model's training data, most mentions of Joe Rogan's podcast happen in forums, on websites, social media posts that can be clearly associated with conservatives and a mostly male-dominated subset of internet conversations, right? From the names that are in there and all of that. It's all just kind of guesstimation, but it's pretty accurate. And that bias becomes useful data that I can then present to potential advertisers and guests who want to target that specific group or target another group, right? That data is instructive. So my question really is, if that model starts to then ingest data that might cause it to collapse, to overfit, to overgeneralize, can that data ever still be trusted? What happens with data that becomes inconclusive because now the model that previously was so correct about this ingested data from other sources that are not correct and corrected itself to be incorrect? I don't have a definite answer to this. I guess just like last week when I talked about, the second brain thing and AI being the big brain that we're all training, there is no answer. We've always had data quality problems in the past, even with human sources too. AI just exacerbates this. And people make things up. People lie when they're told to figure something out today. They write studies with hidden agendas and they write medical studies. They forge economic studies. They've all been written with specific agendas at various points, mostly because people want to keep their jobs. There is bias in there. AI systems, I don't think, have an internal express agenda. They just mirror the agenda of the content or the people that wrote the content that they consume. You always have to think about this when you use AI for anything, right? There is a mirror in there. The goal of an AI is to reply to queries with data that seems to make sense, the most sense, that appears most credibly useful to the person asking for some kind of inference result from the AI. And this is why I believe we have to consciously protect the integrity of our reality when we build AI-based products. Maybe the moment you make AI-generated information public by doing programmatic SEO or even just writing emails that are cold outreach to your potential prospective future customers, or you give it to intermediaries who then use it to make information public, like your own customers, you suddenly have something akin to what I would call almost like a journalistic integrity requirement, but on a data level. Because you're describing a reality that can't just be built upon prior virtual assumptions of said reality. Like you have to kind of anchor it. There has to be a true anchoring moment here. And for me, that anchoring moment means taking data from social media profiles where, at least until recently, mostly humans congregated and interacted. So for each podcast that I have on the platform, I try to pull in all the YouTubes and the Twitters and the Blue Skies and the whatnots, right? All these audiences where real people interact. I take sentiments, conversations, follower counts, engagement numbers, and I feed them into a machine learning system to figure out things like audience size and demographics. I try to not have an AI just come up with it, but I train on data that is real and based on actions or interactions of real human beings. And I think this enrichment has its own internal verification requirement because it's so valuable. So there's something that I still have to manually do for a lot of my work. I have to check if what I'm trying to build at scale is actually true. Everything could be completely automated to the point where there's a constant stream of searching and AI assessment and something, but it needs to be verification, which I think in the near future, funny enough, is something that AI can help with through tool use and internet lookup. Like I could have a system that tries to check all the social feeds and get some sentiment for that and get some scoring going so that can then be fed into the machine learning model for its next iteration. I think the key, if you ever need some kind of verification in your AI chain, is to make verification an isolated step with a different goal and intent than just creating the data, right? If you tell AI to create data, its internal goal, its mission is to create as much credible data as possible, which is why we have hallucinations. Like AI just wants us to feel like, oh yeah, we have all the data. Then it comes up with some random stuff. But if your intent shifts to verifying data, if you give the AI, the agent, whatever you want to call it, a task to verify, not to come up with, but to verify, then the whole mission changes and the system will try to validate, or even better, invalidate what you give it, which, if done thoughtfully and formally correct by checking correctly, can actually be quite useful for weeding out hallucinations from a prior step and therefore prevent or reduce future model collapse data that you would be feeding into the world. And this whole situation about AI systems kind of falling apart, being really cool up to a certain point, but then kind of, imploding, reminds me of something that we've already been experiencing over the last couple decades. And I think it's called the dead internet theory. This theory, which took 20 to 30 years of internet development to be established, suggests that at this point, right now, much of the internet is just automated systems talking to automated systems, but acting like they're human. But we see this constantly on social media, particularly around very influential accounts where there's automated posting because the social media teams, they strategize on how to communicate with that audience. And then in the replies, you get equally automated accounts complying with some kind of agenda-driven argument, right? Either political manipulation, or they attempt to scam you by, linking some weird money thing, or they are just trying to get engagement to build their own thing. It's quite bizarre. It's bots talking to bots. And AI systems of the future will be equally under threat of AI input being prior AI output. Like AIs talking to AIs, teaching each other, and there being a loop that does not guarantee improvement. It just means degradation. And there's nothing inherently wrong with this if it happens, but there has to be a layer of human discernment, or at least human-like discernment. It doesn't have to be a person, but just look at how we consume media. Like we did at least consume media when we went to school. Like we all read the classics, right? Books that have been around for sometimes hundreds of years. And we learn similar lessons from each of these, but we apply them to our own lives and the times that we live in. And we find new meaning in classic literature. And every generation has this. There are books that are hundreds of years old, but we all pull something out of it. There's value in investigating the content of a work in the context of our own experience. And that's contrasted against the context of the author's experience as well. So we learn something about the person. It's unclear to me whether AI systems are capable of making that kind of discernment, like the real human individual experience, contrasted against the currently existing large I am a big model, I contain everything experience. But I think it's up to us as founders, as technologists, as people, to guarantee a level of data quality and intentional verification the moment we work with AI data for our customers, for everybody we built this for, particularly if we use it in public to generate marketing content, write emails, or leave any trace on reality. We have to assume that this is going to make its way into these models of the future. So here's what I'm proposing as a framework for building AI-based businesses responsibly. Mostly I'm proposing this to myself. I just want to keep to these rules. First, prioritize real-world enrichment over pure generation. Like build systems that derive insights from existing human-created content rather than creating entirely new content from scratch. Pull in the real data. And second, implement verification as a separate, distinct process. Don't let the same system that creates data also validate it. Create dedicated verification loops with different intents and goals as agents, or whatever you might want to do in terms of technology. Just separate them. And third, be transparent about bias and limitations. When you're using AI systems, you have to acknowledge their biases upfront. You have to understand that there's bias built in, and then explain how these biases might actually be useful information rather than trying to hide them. Like if you do AI stuff, tell people you do AI stuff. Their expectations kind of hinge on that too. Like if you explain that your AI system has some kind of error rate, they will not use it for their critical stuff. They will still use it, and probably you will use it for their critical work, but they will understand that if there is a mistake, well, it was just AI. So that bias in AI has to be able to be expected if your product is being used. And a fourth point, you have to maintain human oversight, right? You have to, at critical decision points, have the capacity of humanity in there. Automation is powerful, but human discernment remains essential for maintaining data integrity at large and internally as well. Ultimately, you have to consider the long-term impact on the ecosystem, because you have to ask yourself whether your product enriches or pollutes the information environment. And then, I believe, optimize for enrichment, because I don't want to be part of the people that pollute the internet even further, or at worst, pollute the world of AI, which has been so empowering and so cool, to be less effective. Think about at this inflection point where decisions that we make as builders determine whether AI becomes a tool that enhances human knowledge and capability, or one that degrades gradually just the quality of information available to everyone. And the models being trained right now might be the last generation to learn primarily from human-created content. What we do with them and how we choose to build on top of them will determine what the next generation of AI systems learn. And it's wild, I guess, to think about this on the individual level, because we're not Sam Altman. Like, we're not kind of deciding what OpenAI is going to train their model data on, but every single one of us is putting some of that data out there, right? It's not just a technical challenge, it's a responsibility to the future of just information itself. And the internet didn't have to become filled with SEO spam and programmatic content. That happened because of the choices individual builders made, and they prioritize short-term gains over long-term ecosystem health. And look what we have right now, right? We have the chance to make different choices with AI as founders, and most people won't. Obviously, like SEO, programmatic content, people will do this, and they will do the AI version of that. But if we build systems that respect the integrity of information, we can create a lot of value and a lot of reputation for our users and for ourselves and our businesses. The question is not whether we can build profitable AI businesses. We clearly can. It's still hard and people struggle, but AI can be used as a tool. But the question is whether we want to build them in a way that makes the world's information environment better rather than worse. And I believe we can. It's just, we have to be intentional about it from the start. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening to the Bootstrapped Founder. You can find me on Twitter at Arvidkahl, ARVIDKAHL. If you want to support me in this show, please share Podscan.fm with your professional peers and those who you think will benefit from tracking mentions of brands and businesses and names on podcasts out there. Podscan is a near real-time podcast database with a really, really cool API. We got lots of interesting stuff like demographics and emails and everything. So please share the word with those who need to stay on top of the podcast ecosystem. Thanks so much for listening. Have a wonderful day, and bye-bye.